I went to the car dealership where my son worked, and he shouted right in my face, "Get out of here, you can't afford any of our cars." He called security to escort me out, but instead of the guard, his boss showed up. The boss looked at my son and said, "This lady's Rolls-Royce has already been delivered and you're fired." I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're listening to this story from. I'm Margaret Dawson, 62 years old, living in Dallas, Texas. I usually drive an old Toyota Avalon. It's aged, but still runs smoothly. This morning, I stopped in front of the glass doors of Sterling Motors, carrying a worn leather handbag. Inside were my wallet, keys, and 2 birthday cards for my grandkids. I didn't have an appointment. I just wanted to see my son at work. Inside, the floor gleamed, the air filled with the scent of new leather and polished wood. Eric stood in the middle of the showroom, shirt buttoned, iPad in hand, a professional smile on his face. But when he saw me, the smile vanished. His face darkened like a light switch had been flipped off. He walked over quickly, his voice low but sharp. "Mom, why are you here? This isn't a place to drop by." I answered calmly. "I just wanted to see you at work. I heard you're managing the Rolls-Royce section, and I was curious." Eric glanced around. A middle-aged man was inspecting the door of a Ghost, while a young woman tested the driver's seat of a Bentley. Their eyes brushed past me, then went back to the price tags. Eric's face flushed red. "Mom, please go home. These are high-end clients. The way you're dressed, they'll think we're unprofessional." I looked down at my wool cardigan, the cuffs a little frayed. I didn't explain. I just nodded, as if I'd heard a routine announcement. Eric didn't wait for a reaction. He straightened his sleeves and switched to his managerial tone. "Alex, take care of this." The young salesman by the reception desk hesitated. "Yes, Mr. Eric." Eric cut him off. "Call security. Help the lady outside." Eric and I were never the kind of mother and son who spoke harshly to each other. But here, surrounded by cars worth more than a house, he chose that approach. I stood still. I didn't argue. I looked straight into his eyes, calm, almost unnervingly so, even to myself. Years ago, when I ran my furniture store, I'd stand in the warehouse during the holiday rush trucks arriving, staff asking questions, phones ringing nonstop. After all those years, I learned how to keep my heartbeat steady. "You could have just said it quietly," I told him. "No need to call security." He lowered his voice half a tone, not enough to soften it. "You're embarrassing me. Please cooperate." Alex, the young salesman, froze for a second. "Ma'am, I can take you to the reception area. Maybe get you some water." Eric turned to him. "Don't make it complicated. Where's Jason?" The walkie-talkie crackled from the security corner. Jason, the morning guard, walked over. He looked at me, then at Eric, then down at the iPad in Eric's hand, checking who held authority. I said to Jason, "I can walk out on my own." Jason nodded, stepping back slightly. "Yes, ma'am." Eric turned away, his job done. His professional smile clicked back on as he approached the couple by the Bentley. "Sorry for the interruption. Now, this Bentayga comes with an optional." He didn't look at me again. Alex stepped closer, his voice soft. "Ma'am, let me walk you to the reception area. It's more comfortable there." "I'm fine," I said. "Just a moment." He hesitated, then whispered, "I'm sorry." "There's nothing to be sorry for," I replied. "Go on and do your job." A woman in a Navy office dress glanced at me, curious. Maybe she thought I was lost. Maybe she assumed I wanted a photo with one of the cars. It didn't matter. I walked toward the door. Jason held it open. Alex stayed quiet, gripping his notebook, as if he wanted to say something but held it back. I opened the Avalon's door and sat inside. The faint scent of cleaner still lingered from the last detailing. I set my bag on the passenger seat. One of the birthday cards slipped out, the edge showing my written line, "Happy birthday to you both." I slid it back in. I used to believe success would make my son happy. Now I just see he's lost. He's forgotten the most basic human values. I drove straight back to my apartment in North Dallas, turned off the engine, and sat for a minute with my hand resting on the steering wheel. The warm yellow light fell across the wooden table where I always spread out papers whenever I need to organize my thoughts. On the shelf, a photo frame leaned slightly, me standing in front of my first furniture store in 1989, hair tied neatly back, hands still dusted with sawdust. I opened the metal cabinet, and turned the lock. The folders inside were neatly labeled, not a single page missing: the transfer contract for Dawson Home and Living, the balance sheets, the buyer's letter, the bank confirmation. The number stood out as clearly as a nail driven into wood, nearly $30 million. I flipped through the pages, my fingers brushing the uniform lines of print, recalling that final negotiation: no gifts, no promotions, no vague clauses, only the real value of years of hard work. I signed the papers, shook every employee's hand, paid full severance to those who wanted to leave, and helped the rest transition into the new structure. When it was done, I closed the office, cleared the desk, and took home only the photo from 1989. I never told Eric. I thought that by living simply, he'd notice another side of life, the quiet dignity, the way you treat others when no one's watching. I wanted to see if the little boy who once sat on the floor beside me, assembling chair frames, still lived somewhere inside the man standing in that Rolls-Royce showroom. This morning I got my answer. What he sees is only the surface. He's embarrassed by an old sweater. He's afraid of a customer's glance. He's forgotten who the woman at the showroom door really is. I gave myself 10 minutes to remember Eric as a child, the boy who loved hammering nails, counting the lines on a measuring tape, asking why pine wood was softer than oak. He could spend hours sanding until the surface was smooth. He'd purse his lips whenever the edge of a board wasn't straight. Tonight, when I close my eyes, I see those small hands gripping an oversized hammer, missing the mark, striking the air, then laughing shyly. Where did that child go? I heard my own question echo through the kitchen, with no one there to answer. My eyes stung, but no tears fell. After a while, I closed the photo frame and set it beside the table. I picked up my phone and opened my old contacts, scrolling through the names of those who had been part of my life for years. I stopped at one: Rick, head of internal security when Dawson Home and Living expanded to Houston. I dialed. 3 rings. "Hello, Margaret. Been a long time," his deep, slightly raspy voice said, like wood grain under a hand. "Rick, I need someone who works clean, discreet, and within the law. No cheap tricks. I need a record of schedules and basic transactions." He paused. "Family matter?" "Yes. I know someone. Name's Benjamin Cole. Used to work for a big insurance company, now independent. Doesn't talk much, does things by the book. I'll send you his number. I need everything legal, no crossing any lines." "You don't have to tell me that. I'll send it now." A text came through, a phone number and a short note. I called. On the second ring, someone answered. "Benjamin Cole. This is Margaret Dawson," Rick referred me. "He mentioned you. What do you need?" "I need to verify someone's spending habits, travel schedule, and personal associations. It's an adult, my son. Everything must stay within the law. I won't cross any legal boundaries. I only work within limits. I'll need to meet in person. You bring your list of questions, timeline, and purpose. I work better when the goal is clear." "I understand. I'm not looking for a scandal. I just want the truth to protect my grandkids." He didn't say "I understand," he just asked, "Are you free tomorrow afternoon? There's a cafe near Knox Street, 9:30. I'll be in the corner. Come alone. I'll be there. And I want to stress confidentiality." "I make a living off confidentiality," Benjamin said evenly. "See you tomorrow." The call ended. My phone buzzed a message from Rick. "Cole's solid, tough, steady, high reliability score." I replied "thank you" and turned off the ringer. I organized the papers again, slipped the sale contract into its folder, placed it in the cabinet, and locked it. On the table remained only the photo frame, an envelope labeled "Cole, Summary," and the grandkid's birthday card. I picked up the card, flipped it over, and added a line: "Grandma's coming by tomorrow with cake, not store-bought." When I finished writing, I smiled to myself. Some things shouldn't be left for others to do, even if they could do them faster. I turned off the kitchen lights, leaving only the small desk lamp on its glow forming a neat circle. Inside that circle lay 2 photographs, side by side, and a new envelope waiting. I didn't know exactly where tomorrow would lead me, but I knew this much. I had chosen the right tools: precision, discipline, and a man who works by the law. The rest, I would leave to the truth itself. The next morning, I arrived at the cafe near Knox Street, right on time. Benjamin Cole sat in the corner, his back to the wall, a cup of black coffee, no sugar, before him. He looked to be around 40, neat, wearing nothing extra but a small-faced watch. I sat down and slid an envelope labeled Summary across the table. He skimmed through it, jotting a few bullet points into his notebook. "I'll start with what anyone could observe," he said. "I need the truth. No noise, no theatrics," I replied. Benjamin nodded. "You'll get the first update in a week, maybe sooner." We didn't shake hands again when we stood. He left first. I stayed behind for 3 minutes, just long enough to fold a napkin. The following days passed through short, punctual text messages, no flourishes, utterly ordinary. I read every one, never commenting. Each word felt like it had been carved from straight-grained wood. On the 7th day, Benjamin set a thin folder on the table. We met again in the same corner. He opened it, page by page, his tone steady, mechanical, like a sewing machine. Schedules, dinner spots, routes driven, pricey valet slips. A few distant photos, Eric holding the door for a slim brunette woman, name tag visible. Vanessa. Both of them smiling, voices low as they passed the reception desk. Another photo showed them sitting side by side at a bar, wine glasses in hand, shoulders leaning together naturally. "Her name's Vanessa," Benjamin said. "Sales rep at Sterling Motors. They meet regularly 2 to 3 times a week after hours. Same places, an Italian restaurant, a cocktail lounge, a boutique hotel. Valet receipts confirm time and date." He laid out 3 tickets on the table. "Financially, I don't have access to private accounts, but public credit data shows multiple active cards and high revolving debt. He rents a Class A apartment expensive. Estimated expenses exceed the average income for his position." "It's tight." I turned through each page. Nothing I hadn't already suspected, but now the facts stood in a row, backed by timestamps and proof. Benjamin didn't say "I'm sorry," didn't say "that's unfortunate." He knew some truths speak for themselves. "Does his wife know?" I asked. "I haven't approached her. You told me not to disturb the family until the full picture was clear." He closed his notebook. "I'll keep watching within legal limits. If you want me to stop, just say so." "I'll let you know," I said. By the second week, the report grew thicker. One Friday night photo showed Eric standing beside Vanessa at a hotel entrance, hands in pockets, head bent slightly toward her. Another, taken at lunch, showed them in a secluded corner of a sushi restaurant, Eric's hand resting near Vanessa's glass, close enough to erase the line between colleagues. There was also a printout of his apartment's advertisement: utilities, parking fees, amenity packages. Benjamin had underlined the total. "He's living like someone making 1.5 times his actual salary," Benjamin said, "and that's not counting his off-hours spending. Judging by the sports coupe he drives, the insurance alone isn't cheap." "I understand." I closed the file. "Thank you." On the drive home, I pulled into an empty lot, shut off the engine, and let the papers sit on the passenger seat. I stared through the windshield without focusing on anything. Tears came for my son, the man I'd once been so proud of, talented, successful, with a good family. Now he was doing something shameful, cheating, wasting money on another woman while his wife and kids were at home, stretching every dollar to make ends meet. The feeling I'd had that morning at the dealership, my son calling for security, now fit neatly into place. It hadn't been a momentary lapse. It was the visible edge of an iceberg that had been forming for years. Arrogance, obsession with appearances, the belief that everything would sort itself out as long as he stayed in the spotlight. That night, I opened my laptop, pulled up a browser, and typed Charles Whitman. His picture appeared. Around 60, well-tailored suit, restrained smile. I read an old interview he spoke about non-negotiable service standards, about not tolerating employees who disrespect customers. I reviewed company profiles, their sponsorships of local hospitals, their apprenticeship programs. My notes were brief, strict, dislikes fuss, values precision. I looked further into Sterling Motors' public materials, the management list, their responses to customer complaints. The same words repeated over and over: respect, discipline, customer experience. I didn't need more than that. I already knew what kind of boss would do what. Standing in his own showroom, witnessing a scene like the one that morning. The only way to speak to my son now was to put him before a mirror so large he couldn't look away. And that mirror wasn't my kitchen, it was the place where he believed he was strongest. There was nothing glamorous about this plan. It was just the way I'd done things all my life. Choose the right material, the right dimensions, the right point of pressure, and let the rest unfold as it must. I opened my laptop, set my notebook aside, and slowly typed in the email address listed on Sterling Motors' official website. The subject line was brief, the message direct. I introduced myself as Maggie Lawrence, expressing interest in a Rolls-Royce Cullinan with an existing configuration. I stated that I wished to conduct the transaction privately with the highest-ranking representative of the dealership, with a preference for payment via direct wire transfer from a business account. I added 2 lines about my experience collecting luxury cars, ending with a request for a confidential appointment at the owner's office. No mention of Eric. Not a single unnecessary word. The reply came faster than I expected. It was from Charles Whitman's assistant, requesting a short call to better understand the client's needs and perform a simple verification. I dialed in. The woman's voice was crisp, professional to the syllable. "We'd be delighted to assist you, ma'am, but there are a few mandatory steps. Could you please provide legal identification and your attorney's contact information?" "My attorney will send it," I said, "and I'd like to work directly with Mr. Whitman. He'll call you within 24 hours. When the call ended, I composed an email to Mark Ellis, my former attorney, a short summary requesting that he act as the verification liaison. I attached the incorporation papers of the company I still use for investments and added a clear note. "Do not disclose my real name to any floor sales staff." Mark called back 10 minutes later. "You want the name Margaret Dawson kept off the initial exchange record?" he asked. "I'm using my transaction name Maggie Lawrence. It's legal, with an account tied to it. I don't want anyone in the showroom knowing who I am until the day I take delivery." "You've got your reasons?" "I do," he didn't press. "I'll send the verification package today. If they ask for proof of funds, I'll provide a condensed statement." By late afternoon, an email from Whitman himself appeared, not his assistant. A 10-minute video call invitation. I accepted. When he appeared on screen, his collar was sharp, his tone measured but warm. "Mrs. Lawrence, I've reviewed your verification. You're interested in a Cullinan already in stock. We have a black one, fully loaded. Would you prefer to view it in person or have it delivered privately?" "I'd like to see it, in your office, not on the showroom floor." He tilted his head slightly. "Professional curiosity makes me ask why." "I prefer order. Fewer people, fewer risks. And I don't want to be pitched anything beyond the car itself." He smiled faintly. "I respect that. Still, we do have procedures." "I know. That's why I'm offering a wire transfer for the deposit up front, the remainder upon signing. My attorney will also send confirmation that the funds are legitimate." He considered this quickly. "I agree to meet you in my office. On one condition. This transaction will remain separate from all floor staff until the moment of delivery." "I don't intend to set a precedent." "Then we're in agreement. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., he said. The next morning, I wired the deposit following Mark's instructions. The meeting with Whitman was calm and private. His assistant escorted me up via a private elevator. The doors opened into an office overlooking the showroom through one-way glass. Below, everything moved like a silent stage play. Whitman extended his hand briefly. "Would you like to see the car now, or go over terms first?" "Terms first." We sat across from each other at a dark wooden table, the surface gleaming like still water. I outlined 3 clear conditions. No disclosure of this transaction to any sales staff until I took possession of the car. I would arrive in my own vehicle, dressed casually, and I would sign the delivery papers right there in his office before the car left the premises. Whitman read through them without a flicker. "I agree. Any requests concerning publicity? No photos, no online posts, no name mentions. We never publicize clients without consent." The night before delivery, I reviewed the envelope of documents: Mark's memo, deposit confirmation, delivery agreement, and ID copies under my transaction name. I placed the envelope into my worn leather bag and zipped it shut. On the table, my Avalon keys lay beside the new contract, just a hand's width apart. I sat down, leaned forward, and listened to the soft creak of the chair. "Tomorrow," I said quietly, "my son will find out who his mother really is." I arrived right at noon, parking the Avalon in the visitor row. Rain from the night before still streaked the windows, and the Texas sun was already burning it off in curls of steam. I turned off the engine, grabbed my worn leather bag, and stepped through the heavy glass doors. The receptionist glanced up, took in my plain clothes, offered a routine greeting, then turned back to her screen, her voice dropping as if someone had lowered the volume. The showroom gleamed as always, heels clicking, car doors opening and closing, salesmen explaining suspension systems and horsepower. Eric stood not far away, talking to a couple, tracing graceful lines along the Bentley's body like a teacher illustrating a perfect curve. He saw me. The professional smile disappeared instantly. His brows drew tight. He left the couple standing there and came straight toward me. "Mom, I told you not to come here again." His voice dropped, but not enough that others couldn't hear. "Do you really think you can afford to sit in one of these cars?" I looked at him and simply said, "I just wanted to ask the price." He let out a short, empty laugh. "Ask for what, Mom? You couldn't afford it in a lifetime." I didn't look around for allies. My hand stayed on the strap of my bag, feeling the dry leather under my fingers. I stood near the Cullinan, staring at its polished surface as though into a flat mirror. Eric took half a step back, as if afraid I might move closer. A young salesman a few yards away froze, glancing between us but too nervous to intervene. I said evenly, "If this makes you uncomfortable, you can go back to your clients. I don't need you telling me how to do my job." He half turned, clutching his iPad, but his eyes stayed locked on me, like he was trying to drive away a shadow. Then came the quiet tap of shoes on the staircase. The room fell still, layer by layer, like an air conditioner shutting off. Charles Whitman descended. The man didn't need to speak. The air itself seemed to part for him. Holding a thin folder, he stopped before me and nodded, as if this meeting had been planned all along. "Mrs. Lawrence," he said, "a pleasure to meet you. Your car is ready." A silence stretched out. I could hear someone swallow. Eric whipped around, face drained of color as if under surgical lights. "Her car?" he stammered. Whitman didn't look at him. His tone was deliberate, each word landing like a hammer on measured wood. "No, the car belongs to Mrs. Lawrence, who has paid in full for her Rolls-Royce." Then he turned his head toward Eric. "And you're terminated, effective immediately. Sterling Motors has no place for anyone who disrespects its clients." The staff froze. The man inspecting the Bentley exhaled softly, as if he'd seen this coming. Eric opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again. No sound made it into a sentence. His hands clenched the iPad so hard his knuckles went white. He began. "No." Whitman's interruption was calm but final. "Turn in your badge at reception. HR will contact you today. Thank you for your time here." Eric looked around for something to hold on to. No one met his eyes. The young salesman gently pulled the receptionist back behind the counter. The couple turned to another car as if nothing had happened. I remained where I was neither forward nor back. Whitman handed me the folder. "Let's step into my office to finalize the paperwork," he said, his tone restored to courteous precision, like a door closing properly. "Would you prefer the private elevator or the stairs?" "I'll follow you," I said. Eric spoke again, a final effort. "Mom, what are you doing?" I turned to him. No anger, no sarcasm. Just one quiet sentence. "Son, sometimes people need to learn respect before they learn to sell." His eyes flickered once, then he froze. Whitman gestured for me to follow. As I climbed the stairs, I could still see the showroom below through the one-way glass. Eric standing motionless among the cars, everything else flowing around him like water around a stone. In the office, Whitman pulled out a chair for me and slid the folder forward. "The paperwork as agreed," he said. "Deposit confirmation, delivery terms, and the remaining balance." I took the pen and signed where marked, each signature smooth, settling neatly into place. "Thank you for this morning," I said when it was done. "I only followed principle," he replied. "We don't exist without respect for the people who pay us." "I know." He stood, called for a technician to bring up the keys. The young man entered wearing gloves, setting the key fob on the desk as if it were something fragile. "Congratulations, ma'am," he said, meeting my eyes without glancing at my clothes. "I'll drive it out now," I said. Whitman nodded. "Security will open the gate." We went down together. The glass doors parted. No one spoke as I walked through the showroom. I touched the key lights, blinked. The car bowed slightly, as if greeting me. I opened the door. The scent of new leather rose like a silent welcome. Sitting behind the wheel, I took a deep breath. The engine's whisper was so smooth it felt like a promise of secrecy. I eased the car out. The tires rolled soft and sure. As I passed, Eric was still standing there, holding a stack of papers, probably the contract he'd been about to close with his earlier clients. The pages curled under his trembling fingers. He watched the car glide past, his eyes unfocused, unable to find an anchor. I didn't look back a second time. Outside, the noon sun spread a thin gold sheen across the lot. At the gate, I caught Jason's eyes. He raised a hand in salute, lifted the barrier, said nothing. I nodded in return. The car rolled forward, and the world slid backward like a stage backdrop being drawn away. I didn't smile. I didn't sigh with relief. I just kept my eyes steady, my hands firm on the wheel. Everything had unfolded exactly as planned. I hadn't come to perform, I'd come to hold up a mirror, and that mirror had reflected everything that needed to be seen. That afternoon, I drove the Rolls-Royce straight home, turned off the engine, and sat still for a few beats, waiting for my heartbeat to settle. My phone vibrated continuously. Benjamin's text was brief. Eric has left the dealership with a cardboard box, driving straight to his home in North Dallas. I replied with a single word. Understood, then put the keys in a drawer, changed shoes, and set the kettle on. The silence in the kitchen sounded different from the mornings. It was no longer taut like a string, it was dense, sealed, like a decision freshly stamped. By evening, Julia called. Her voice was thin, stretched as if holding itself together. He came home early, with a box, said they wanted money, said it was unfair. I didn't press further. Through the line came the sound of children in the background, the fridge door, dishes softly clinking. She ended the call quickly, saying only, "I'll text later tonight." The text arrived before midnight, a blurry photo taken through the dealership glass, a black car being delivered, with a message from one of Julia's friends. An older woman just picked up a Rolls at Sterling Motors. Same time Eric got fired? Julia didn't comment, just sent a single question mark, like tossing a pebble into water. I replied, "Tomorrow. Coffee near White Rock Lake, 9 a.m. I'll bring some things. Come alone." The next morning, I arrived 10 minutes early. The cafe overlooked a line of trees, sunlight rising evenly across their leaves. I chose a corner table, my back to the wall. On the table sat a thick envelope, printed photos from Benjamin's report, copies of Eric's public credit summary, a list of restaurant visits with Vanessa, 3 valet stubs, and a page I had typed myself, itemizing every expense beyond his means. I added no commentary. Julia came in wearing a light coat, hair tied up. She glanced around before walking over, pulling out a chair. No hug, no small talk. I nodded. "Would you like something to drink?" "No," she said. "If you have something to show me, just show it." I slid the envelope across. "Everything here is legal. You need to see it to protect yourself and the kids." Julia opened it, laying each page out under the beam of sunlight on the table. She read slowly, her fingertip following the lines as though afraid to miss a word. When she reached the photo of Eric standing outside the hotel with Vanessa, she lingered. Her jaw tightened, but her eyes didn't water. She turned to the credit summary, stopped at the revolving debts, then at the high-end apartment rent, then at the restaurant list. I didn't interrupt. I let the facts speak for themselves. "So the kids' tuition got delayed not because of household expenses," Julia said evenly, her tone cold. She set the paper down without looking at me. "He said city taxes went up, insurance costs too, and a dozen other excuses. All of this," I said, tapping the papers lightly, "is just a map. The road you take is up to you." She looked up, meeting my gaze. There was no plea for help in her eyes now, only calculation about the next move. "Do you want me on your side, Mother?" "I want you on the side of the truth. And to protect those 2 kids, that's all." Julia stacked the papers back into the envelope. Her lips twitched as if to say something, then stopped. "I need time." "Take your time," I said. "When you need me, call." She nodded, holding the envelope close to her chest like a test paper she had to carry herself. "I won't bring this up in front of the kids. I want things done properly." "Good." She stood. "Thanks for letting the facts speak. I don't need any judgment." "I have none left to give," I said. "The only thing I want is for those children not to be dragged into debt and deceit." Julia walked out. Her reflection stretched thin across the glass door, then broke as it closed behind her. I watched her go, not texting right away. I knew every step today would set off a chain reaction. Everything had to stay in rhythm. I paid the bill and stepped outside. In the back lot, A dark sports coupe was parked in the corner, windows tinted. I glanced at it once, not stopping. But I knew who was inside. I went straight to my car, got in, and closed the door. The phone buzzed. A text from Benjamin, a distant photo of Eric in the driver's seat, hand on the wheel, staring toward the cafe entrance. The caption was short. He arrived 15 minutes early. Stayed in the car. No more photos. I started the engine, waited for it to settle, then drove around the block and parked under a tree. I didn't want Benjamin to take more pictures. I didn't want a confrontation this morning. About 10 minutes later, the phone rang. Eric. I let it buzz out, then waited for the second call before answering. Mom, his voice was hoarse, tight. What the hell are you doing? I'm sitting in my car, I said, on a quiet street. Don't mock me. I'm not mocking you. A pause. His voice dropped, straining for control. I need peace. Tell your guy to stop following me. And tell my wife not to listen to you. I don't give her orders, I said. She's an adult. She'll read and decide. I'm not seeing Vanessa anymore. Not for now. He spat the words, more to himself than to me. There was rustling, a heavy breath, fingers drumming the steering wheel. You've won. Happy now? This isn't a game of winning. All you ever do, he said bitterly, is teach me a lesson about values. I did very little, I said. The truth did the rest. He hung up. I looked at the phone for a second before setting it down on the passenger seat. It buzzed again. Vanessa. I didn't pick up. A new text came in from an unknown number. He's responsible for everything. Beneath it, a single emoji of a closed door. I drove home, passing White Rock Lake, sunlight rippling across the water. I didn't stop. At a red light, I opened my notebook and wrote briefly. Julia saw everything. Eric, defensive. Vanessa withdrew. Next to it, I drew an arrow. Attorney setting schedule. I didn't rush the pace. I knew Julia needed time to slot things into the right drawers, just like when I used to fit wooden pegs into frames. Force them too fast, and you only break the joint. Early in the morning, Julia sent me a photo. The two children curled up in sleep, their foreheads dotted with sweat. Below it was a single line. I'm calling the lawyer today. I looked at the screen for a few seconds, then called her. She answered quietly, so as not to wake the kids. I've chosen a firm downtown, she said. They have an opening late this morning. I replied simply, You don't have to go alone. She hesitated for a moment, then said softly, Okay. I arrived 10 minutes early, waiting in the glass building's hallway, watching people come and go. Julia stepped out of the elevator, holding a neatly clipped stack of papers. We exchanged a nod. Inside the conference room, the female attorney handed Julia a cup of warm water and asked 3 direct questions. What she wanted to protect first, what documents she had, and how ready she was to move forward. Julia opened the file I'd helped her organize. Joint bank statements, a late mortgage notice, printed messages Eric had sent to Vanessa, several photos from Benjamin's report, and a page she'd written herself noting key moments, dates, when the children were sick and who took them to the doctor, when the bank sent warning letters, when Eric missed a parent-teacher meeting. The attorney flipped through, underlined a few lines, and marked the documents that mattered. The process will take time, she said briskly, but there's a solid foundation. First, we'll ask the court to grant you temporary primary custody so the kids can have stability. Then we'll file for a temporary child support order. I'll submit the request today. Julia nodded, lips pressed together. She didn't ask long questions. I saw her hand slowly release the cup, her index finger still red where it had gripped. After a difficult session gathering originals and copies, we signed where needed. The attorney collected everything, promising to file that day and request a prompt hearing. Outside the room, Julia leaned against the wall for a few seconds, breathing steadily. I'll pick up the kids on time, she said, like someone reminding herself of her rhythm. 2 days later, we were at the Dallas family court for the temporary hearing. The courtroom was bright and cold, sparsely filled, with 2 rows of wooden benches. Julia sat beside her attorney, hands on her knees, posture straight. I sat a few feet behind her, the legal distance. Eric entered half a minute late, rumpled suit, unshaven chin, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. He glanced around for me, then stopped at Julia. I neither nodded nor looked away. We were 3 adults in a room, saying very little about the long consequences of years of choices. When her turn came, Julia stood and spoke exactly as rehearsed, no embellishment. He's been unfaithful, spends beyond his means, and neglects his responsibilities to the children. Here are the bank statements and the late mortgage notice. Here is the child's medical record. I took them alone. The attorney handed over each exhibit, papers neatly clipped. The judge skimmed, asked 2 confirming questions. Julia answered calmly, her voice steady. When it was Eric's turn, he tried to build another story. I was set up. Someone followed me, took photos with a coworker, twisted everything. My mother, he turned sharply toward me, searching for someone to blame. The judge cut in, voice firm but not raised. The mother-in-law is not a party to the marital assets in this case. We're here about the children. Eric fell silent, exhaling hard, knuckles white around his hand. Julia's attorney requested to submit an additional mortgage delinquency email and a proposed child support chart. The judge checked the clock. We won't prolong this. The evidence is sufficient for the temporary stage. Then she read her ruling slow and clear. Julia was granted temporary primary custody. Eric's visitation would be supervised at a coordination center for 3 months, subject to review. Monthly support payments to begin immediately and arrive on time. She said nothing beyond the ruling. There was no need. Out in the hallway, the air thickened, like rain was near. Eric walked straight toward me, eyes red. You pushed me into a corner. I looked at him, my tone level. The truth did that, not me. He stood still, jaw clenched. Julia pulled open the elevator door and stepped inside without looking back. The sound of the door closing against metal felt like a period at the end of a sentence. We didn't celebrate. There was no reason to. Julia stayed with the lawyer another 15 minutes to sign a few authorizations and confirm the next filing dates. I waited on the bench outside. Holding my bag, it felt light, though inside were papers heavy enough to shift the structure of a family. When she came out, her face was calmer. Tonight I'll tell the kids about the visitation schedule, she said, briefly, without blaming anyone. Good, I said. And if you need anything from me, remember, I'm always here. The morning after the court hearing, Julia sent me a short message. I have an interview. By late afternoon, she called. Her voice carried a trace of exhaustion, but a new kind of strength. They hired me, she said. Office manager, private clinic up in North Dallas. I start next week. I congratulated her without adding advice. When I hung up, I realized I was smiling in the kitchen, both hands resting on the table, as if holding down a perfectly fitted board. In her first week, Julia's schedule transformed completely. Up at 6:30 to wake the kids, out the door by 7, at the clinic by 8, home by 5, a stop at the grocery store, dinner prep by 6:30, homework checks at 8, shower at 9:30, and budget notes at 10. That first evening, she sent me a photo of a small notebook, 2 neat columns labeled income and expenses, a few tidy numbers, and a weekly goal. No unplanned credit card use. I replied with a thumbs-up emoji. No speech about discipline was needed. The numbers said it all. I decided to move closer to the children's school, a 2-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor, overlooking a shared lawn. I brought very little, a few changes of clothes, 2 old picture frames, a folding table, and a teapot set. On moving day, I hired just 1 mover. By afternoon, I'd hung a weekly calendar on the kitchen wall, pick up the kids on Tuesdays and Thursdays, bake together on Sunday afternoons. When Julia found out, she texted, "Thank you, Mom. That'll make things easier for the kids." I replied, "I'm just nearby, that's all." For the first pickup, I waited by the school gate. The kids came running, backpacks bouncing, talking over each other about science, club, and art class. At home, we opened a 3rd-grade math book, scissors, and colored paper. We cut letters, worked through addition with carrying, and patched crooked lines with glue. When one of them asked, "Grandma, is Dad calling today?" I paused my pen and said simply, "He'll call on his schedule. I don't know the exact time, but he will." They nodded, shifting topics to their new paper robot. That evening, before returning them to Julia, I gave them 3 handmade cardboard bookmarks, each labeled with a word: read, write, math. The days that followed found a steady rhythm. Julia showed up to work on time, never missed a shift. She opened her own bank account and sent me a screenshot with 3 main categories: rent, food, and tutoring. At the bottom was a smaller line, but an important one: emergency fund. I didn't ask how much. Instead, I asked if she'd eaten lunch. She replied, "Packed from home." That was enough to ease my mind. One Saturday afternoon, I brought over a stack of listings for homes in good school zones. I sat at her small dining table while the kids colored in the living room. "I looked through a few that fit your range," I said gently. "If you'd like, we could drive around this weekend." Julia touched the corner of one page, running her fingertip along the edge as if feeling the paper's weight. Then she looked up, her voice soft but sure. "I need to decide this myself. You've helped me enough. Let me review them first, then I'll ask for your opinion." I paused. The old habit in me wanted to outline a full plan, but I swallowed it back, folded the papers, and slipped them into my bag. "All right," I said. "When you're ready, I'll go with you." She smiled a thin, penciled smile, but firm. I felt as though I'd just pulled a stray nail out of a frame. Small changes began to appear in Julia's home, like the faint scent of fresh paint. One evening, she sent me a photo of the living room wall brighter, cleaner. The furniture had been shifted toward the window to give the kids space for their Lego spread. The new curtains were cheap but matched perfectly, hanging just right. A small vase of wildflowers, cut from the yard, sat on the dining table. When I visited, the air smelled of toasted bread and crayons. Neither scent was expensive, but together they made the place feel like home. The kids laughed more. The older one joined the chess club and challenged me to practice moves at night. I taught him to see the whole board, not just the last piece he'd taken. The younger one joined the art group, bringing home a painting of an orange sunrise, asking me where to hang it. I chose a spot beside the study desk, under the wall clock. "So every time you check the time," I said, "you'll see your own work." She hopped in place, 4 little steps, like she'd just won a prize. When her birthday came, Julia didn't book a restaurant. She texted me, "Mom, come early. I need someone to watch the oven for the second batch." I arrived, tied on an apron, mixed batter, watched the timer. The cake came out with a few cracks on top, not perfect, but fragrant. A handful of classmates came, lining their shoes neatly by the door before taking turns blowing out candles. I took a few photos, steadying my hands so the string lights outside wouldn't glare into the lens. When the kids cheered and candy spilled from the piñata, I saw Julia leaning against the doorframe, her eyes glowing with a light that wasn't from candles or bulbs. It was the quiet light of someone who'd done something hard and right. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Julia washed the dishes while I dried them. She asked about the new curtains she'd bought on clearance. "Too short, Mom?" I tugged the edge gently, my fingertip tracing the hem. "They're just right," I said. That night, when I turned off the lights, I thought of Eric, not with pity, not with anger, just as a name among the things I no longer control. I touched the edge of the 1,989 photo frame, then the one of Eric at 6 years old. The two pictures still sat side by side, unchanged. I lay down and took a deep breath. Tomorrow was Tuesday pickup day at 3:30. I ran through the list in my head: homework folder, scissors, colored paper, leftover cake from the birthday. Everything was in its place. The rest, as always, was just keeping the rhythm. The message came on a drizzly evening: "I want to see you." No greeting, no explanation. I stared at the phone screen in the kitchen while water simmered in the kettle. I set it down, texted back a location near the weekend flea market, a small diner that served grilled corn and sweet iced tea. 6 o'clock, I typed. Nothing more. The next day, I arrived 10 minutes early and chose a table by the window. The place smelled of fried oil and grilled meat. Knives hit cutting boards. A baseball game played faintly on a TV in the corner. Eric walked in, looking worn. His shirt was untucked, the cuffs frayed. He held a faded baseball cap, crumpling and smoothing it, as if unsure what to do with his hands. I gestured for him to sit. "I was wrong," he said before he'd even settled. "I need to fix it from the worst part out." I nodded, saying nothing. The waiter brought 2 glasses of iced tea, setting them down softly as if afraid to spill. Eric stared at the clear glass and spoke quietly. "I moved into a rundown apartment near the highway, small, noisy. I got a job at a used car lot. I've been late 3 times in 2 weeks. They warned me. I just stood there. I had no excuse." He exhaled sharply, like something heavy had left his chest. "At night, the bills pile up. I turn on the TV, but I can't hear a thing." That room feels like a box. I listen to the rain scratching at the window, shredding itself into thin lines. And Vanessa? I asked, without adding judgment. She came once, he said. Stayed 10 minutes. Told me straight, I don't want to be part of this anymore. When the door shut, I sat on the floor, staring at the cracks in the tiles. That's when I finally admitted to myself it all started with arrogance. He lifted his eyes and didn't look away. I pulled 2 business cards from my purse and placed them on the table, one for a financial counselor, one for a therapist. I slid them toward him. No one can save you but you, I said. Those kids need a father they can rely on. Everything else put it aside for now. He picked up the cards, running his thumb along the edges. I'll go. When? I asked. Therapy on Thursday, debt management class on Saturday. He gave the times and addresses. I nodded, sipped my melting tea. There was no hug between us. None was needed. His first therapy session was on a heavy, rain-soaked afternoon. He texted, I'm in the lobby. An hour later, done. I didn't ask, how was it? He called first. I barely talked, he said, voice rough. At the end, I just said, I've been ashamed in front of my mother. I heard footsteps echo across tile, then a door closed softly. She gave me a sheet of paper, told me to write down 3 things I really want to change, but they can't be about anyone else. I wrote, be on time, cut the cards, don't lie. Good, I said. That Saturday, he sent a photo from his debt management class, a whiteboard with a simple chart showing the order of debt repayment priorities. I'm learning to clear the small ones first, then tackle the big ones, he texted. After a hard process, I cut the last card. The instructor handed me scissors. I did it myself. Put it in a drawer with others, they call it a milestone. The picture was grainy, but I could still see the clean slice through the numbers. I felt a small lightness in my chest, like someone had just lifted a clamp off a board. At the used car lot, Eric took on any task washing cars, cleaning interiors when short-staffed without complaint. The first week, he was late once when the bus broke down. The second week, he left half an hour early and waited under the awning before they opened. The manager called me in, he said. Handed me a clean rag and said, we'll start again with skill. I said, yes, sir. I didn't go there. I didn't want to turn this stretch into an inspection. I kept my own rhythm, picked up the kids on schedule, returned them on time, said nothing about their father beyond what was necessary. When they asked, will Dad come by? I answered, yes, on his days. He's learning to be on time. They nodded, understanding on time the way children do in terms of homework and recess. That meaning was enough. One evening, Eric called from his shabby apartment. Mom, I just put up a new calendar, he said. I know how many months it'll take. I can't rush it. I leaned back in my chair, eyes on the 1,989 photo. No need to rush, I said. Just keep steady. I'm afraid I'll fall halfway, he admitted. I've fallen many times, I said. The difference is what you do after. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 1 deep breath. I understand. Late that night, I set the phone down and stepped onto my balcony. The grass below was dark. A neighbor's cat crept by. I lit a small candle in a glass cup, not to pray, not to plan. The flame stood still for a moment, then swayed when the wind passed, but it didn't go out. I thought of the 2 children asleep at Julia's house, their steady breathing, the blanket pulled to their chests, the corner of the new curtain by the window. I thought of Eric alone in his apartment by the highway, phone on the table, a crooked calendar taped up with cheap tape. I didn't cry. Not because I was stronger than anyone else, but because tears weren't useful now. Discipline was. I went inside, closed the door, and turned off the kitchen light. On the table, my notebook lay open. Eric, therapy, on time. Debt, last card cut. Julia, steady. Kids, laughing more. I added 1 small mark next to the word steady. On Eric's phone, I imagined, was a picture of his children. He'd look at it before setting his alarm 10 minutes earlier. In my apartment, the candle burned to the end of the wax and went out without a sound. And I knew that at the end of the hall, a door had quietly eased open, not because anyone forced it, but because the air on both sides had finally changed. My part now remained the same, to stand at the right distance, stay still, and let the back of a man learning to walk upright straighten inch by inch. A year later, Julia's backyard glowed under a string of new lights. A wooden table sat in the middle of the lawn, trays of grilled meat giving off a rich aroma. The sizzle of fat hitting coals sounded like a steady count. The kids ran around the oak tree, grass-stained shoes kicking up dust, laughing until their voices cracked. I set the plates, poured lemonade, and straightened the tablecloth that had slipped off one corner. The doorbell rang right on time. Eric entered through the side gate, shirt tucked in neatly, holding a small box wrapped in brown paper and white twine. He greeted me, then Julia, his eyes steady, not evasive. "I'm on time, just like I promised," he said, voice calm. Then he handed Julia his phone, showing a note screen. Credit card debt, cleared. 2 loans left car and 1 personal. Payments current, no late fees. No grand promises, no rehearsed apologies, just a report, plain and clean, like a pay stub. I took the gift box, gave it a small shake. Inside was a children's gardening set, wooden handles, stainless steel heads. "The kids already planted a small tomato patch," I said. Eric looked toward the garden's corner, where bamboo stakes held up thin stems, the leaves a deep green. "I'll come by this weekend," he said. "We can put in 2 more stakes." His tone was ordinary, no forced warmth, no distance either. The kids spotted him and came running, talking over each other. Eric crouched to tie the younger one's shoelaces. "What did you do in science today?" he asked. The older one chimed in. "We had a quiz on the water cycle. I got a good grade." Eric smiled, not overly, just right. "Let me see the paper." They brought out a wrinkled worksheet from the house. He smoothed each corner with his palm, looked it over carefully. "You explained it in your own words," he said. "That's good. Teachers like that." Julia stood in the kitchen doorway, shielding her eyes from the light. Her gaze had changed, no longer wary, though not yet warm. She watched how Eric answered the children's questions, how he stepped aside when they ran past, how he placed his phone on the table and didn't touch it while they talked. After a while, she came out, her voice composed. "Weekend schedule, you pick them up Friday evening. Return them Sunday afternoon. Let me know a day ahead if there's any change." Eric nodded, entered it into his phone, then repeated it aloud to confirm. "Okay," Julia said simply, turning back inside to check the oven. I noticed a muscle in her neck once, always tense, now eased. As the sun dropped low, we brought dinner to the table. I carved the meat. Julia divided the salad. The kids fought over the tongs. Eric ate lightly, spoke mostly about the children. "The little one's got a good wrist. She should draw more." Julia nodded. "I already signed her up for an art class at the community center." "Good," he said, no credit, grabbing, no side advice. Dinner moved smoothly, like a board planed clean. After washing up, I sat with Eric under the porch. The sunset cast a honey hue across the fence. Crickets started their hesitant song. Eric leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the kids line up on the grass. "I used to think power was making people afraid," he said, eyes fixed ahead. "Turns out it's owning what you do. No blaming the weather, traffic, or anyone else." He turned a plain metal ring on his finger, not a wedding band, just something he wore to remind himself he'd cut up all his cards. "Real power," I said, "is keeping your decency with or without money. Whether you're standing in a bright room or a dark one with trucks passing outside, you speak the same truth." He nodded, quiet for a while, letting the words settle deep. "I know I can't undo everything, and I'm not asking for forgiveness in one clean stroke. I just want to walk the long road at the right pace." "Good," I said. "The long road lasts longer." In the yard, the kids asked for a story. They dragged their chairs closer, then sat cross-legged on the grass. I told them about a carpenter on the Texas coast rebuilding his house after a storm. No metaphors, no fancy moral. Just the way he measured every beam, matched the grain, planed the edges until his hand could glide over without catching. When something cracked, he didn't patch it, he replaced it entirely. "Why not fix it faster, Grandma?" the younger one asked. "Because fast makes it loose," I said. "A house has to stand on tight joints." The older one nodded like he'd solved a math problem that needed every single step. Julia stood in the doorway, the kitchen light behind her turning amber. I saw her shoulders drop as the story ended. Eric didn't interrupt. He just laid a hand on the boy's shoulder when the child leaned in. The arrogance once in his eyes was gone, replaced by a space where something steadier could grow. When darkness fully settled, I turned on the string lights. The cricket's rhythm swelled, a soft suburban orchestra. We cleared the dishes, the kids unwrapped their gift, and squealed at the sight of the garden tools. Eric tested a tiny shovel, tightened a screw with a pocket screwdriver, checked the handle's grip before handing it over. "Tomorrow," he said, pointing to a corner of the yard, "you can dig there, but fill it back when you're done. Don't leave roots bare." I watched the three of them, my heart calm like wood that's fully dried. I no longer needed a Rolls-Royce to prove anything. That car had only been a bridge, a way for truth to walk through a room full of light. The rest of the road, each person had to travel on their own feet, the ones that had learned from stone and gravel. Before leaving, I tightened one loose bulb on the light string, flicked it until it glowed evenly. Julia walked me to the gate. "Mom, can you come early tomorrow? I want to go over 2 house options with you." I nodded, unable to hide a smile. "You make the final call," I said. "I'll just check which joints might come loose." Eric took the trash to the bin, then turned back to me. "I'll send you my weekend schedule for pickups and drop-offs. I'm not making any other promises." "No need," I said. "Just be on time." Driving home, I rolled the window down, letting the night air carry the scent of freshly cut grass. In the rearview mirror, Julia's backyard lights blurred into a single warm streak. I thought of the 1,989 photograph and the one of Eric at 6, still side by side on my shelf. I won't move them. The past stays next to the present, neither hidden nor displayed. In Texas, people show off many things: a new car, a big house, a blue pool. I choose to show something you can't see with your eyes, the way a family relearns respect. No noise, no fireworks, just joints fitting tighter, day by day, beneath a string of yellow lights bright enough to see the way home. The story you just heard is fictional, but every word, every glance, every cold, deliberate tightening of that woman's hand was carved from a truth no one likes to admit. Sometimes, to save a family, you have to let it fall apart first. Not out of hatred, but out of love, the kind of love that's gone beyond softness and become discipline, fairness, and faith in what's right. Names and details have been changed to protect the identities of those who might be recognized. We don't tell this story to glorify revenge, but to remind you that there are mothers, quiet, steadfast people, who choose to rebuild a broken home, not with tears, but with measurement and labor, line by line, joint by joint, until it can stand on its own again. If you've ever had to be cold to protect something warm, if you've ever been called cruel simply for speaking the truth, remember, that isn't cruelty. It's the courage of someone who takes responsibility. Leave a comment if you've ever had to cut away something you loved to save something you believed in. And if you believe that justice isn't a scream, but the quiet click when every piece falls into place, share this video. Somewhere out there, someone might need a reason to stand up, to begin again, to learn how to move in rhythm once more. Don't forget to subscribe, because here, every story is a cold, necessary dissection to expose deceit, to cut out weakness, to stitch back trust, and to teach the heart how to beat steady again, not out of hatred, but for the sake of truth. On the final screen, we'll leave you with 2 more stories about people who lost everything just to keep the one thing that mattered most: dignity. Believe me, you won't just watch them. You'll feel every heartbeat in your chest.